FPL Gameweek29 Team Selection on the FPL Joe YouTube channel. Today, we'll do a quick recap of Gameweek 28, before moving swiftly on to discussing all the major considerations for my team in Gameweek 29, with many managers hit with the tsunami of flagged players and major uncertainty around key players like Haaland, Wilson, O'Reilly, and more. I'll be going through all the latest news that we have to help you make the best decision for your team, plus all the moves that I'm considering for Gameweek 29, with future transfer plans as we approach the first blank game week of the season in Gameweek 31. And of course, all timestamps will be in the description if you want to skip to a specific part. So without further ado, let's take a quick look at how I did in Game Week 28. 71 points all out, a tiny red arrow slipping from 91k down to 94k by a margin of just 1 point. And in all honesty, it was a slightly conflicting game week. Huge success with Bruno captain, who got a goal, an assist, and 3 bonus for a 13-pointer, comfortably earning him the MVP award for my team this week. Plus an instant return from Harry Wilson and a return for Dango Ouattara as soon as I transferred them into my team. I actually took a slight gamble in Game Week 28, taking a -4 hit to bring in Hill, Dango and Wilson, which paid off massively with a total gain of 11 points. And then to top it off, 2 attacking returns from my Arsenal defenders in the final game of the week. Gabriel with an assist and 3 bonus, and Timber finally with an attacking return, scoring in Game Week 28. So how did this end in a red arrow? Well, 2 players ruined this one for me, Haaland and Ekitiké. Ekitiké hauled a 15-pointer, although not too highly owned, and after actually making the right call on captaincy for once, I was on track for a massive gain from Bruno's haul. However, due to Haaland being out, and the 2 most popular vice-captains being Bruno and Ekitiké, all of my captaincy gains were wiped as soon as the vice-captains and auto-subs came into play, and this was compounded by the 2 players that I got off my bench, Munoz and Chalobah, combining for a measly 2 points. But all is not lost, so let's move on to Game Week 29 as we look ahead to see why. Firstly, we're going to have to look at injuries. I've actually come away quite lucky here. Having known in advance that Wirtz was going to be out, I was fortunate to only have 2 extra flags appear in my team, but as seen in the screenshot, others weren't quite so lucky. And there's a whole set of highly owned players with flags by their name, so let's cover all of these key flagged assets for Game Week 29, and it is crucial to say, we'll likely get updates on a few of these today, so do not make any transfers until after the final injury news comes out. I'll update the latest news in the pinned comment, so be sure to check there too. And while you're there, please do drop a like on the video if all of this research helps your planning for Game Week 29. So starting off with Haaland. No real updates, and we're unlikely to get one from Pep. He was pictured in training, but that's not an indication of him actually being fit. Posts are managed of course by social media managers and by the club. It's ultimately Pep's narrative, not Haaland's. And with a likely blank in Game Week 31, meaning only Nottingham Forest at home and West Ham away to play before then, it actually gets worse, with West Ham away being sandwiched in between 2 UCL games, as shown by the screenshot from Lego Mane, who produces some really interesting graphics showing the recovery time between the games of Premier League teams. City play a whopping 3 games in 6 days, only a 3-day turnaround between each game, the tightest possible fixture run. And who are the team that they're playing twice in the UCL that's causing that? Real Madrid. So we wouldn't be surprised at all to see a minutes reduction for Haaland in the Premier League, to rest for the second Real Madrid game, given the comparatively easy opponents in West Ham. And it's super important to remember that as FPL managers, while we see an easy fixture for a top player and think, perfect opportunity for a haul, their managers look at that same fixture and think, perfect opportunity for a rest. But before we even get to that, there's yet another Man City uncertainty arising, blank game week 31, or so we thought. If Man City lose to Newcastle in the FA Cup this weekend, there's a chance that they might not even blank in blank game week 31. There's a complicated fixture reason, but for the summary, game week 31 deadline is in late March, a whole 3 weeks before the game week 32 deadline in mid-April. The Premier League fixtures are, of course, that weekend as game week 31 commences, and then we'll have a 2-week international break. And once players have returned from the international duty, they have the FA Cup quarter-final, so no Premier League games. But if Man City lose against Newcastle this weekend in the FA Cup round of 16, they could actually play their postponed Premier League game versus Palace on the same FA Cup weekend, which would still fall inside Game Week 31, meaning they wouldn't actually blank at all. Now even if City do lose to Newcastle, it's not guaranteed. The Premier League have specifically reserved this weekend off for FA Cup games, so it would require them to be very keen to get this game played as soon as possible, which they might want to do to avoid a title race where Arsenal actually have a game in hand. So my advice would be that, as far as Game Week 29 planning goes, work on the basis that Man City will blank in Game Week 31, as that's still the most likely option, and if Man City do lose in the FA Cup this weekend, we can reevaluate from Game Week 30 onwards. The only caveat is that I probably wouldn't make luxury or non-essential moves to remove City players in Game Week 29, especially if it means taking a hit to do so, as the blank isn't guaranteed just yet. So all that to say, and looking back at our injury updates and to Haaland, City will still likely blank in Game Week 31, it's just not guaranteed yet. Haaland is the best captain option for Game Week 29, assuming that he actually plays, and if City do blank, then he's a decent sell in either Game Week 30 or 31. or you just hold through to Game Week 32 or rebuy on Wildcard 32. And if City don't blank, he's still not a bad hold, but he's also not fantastic due to the Game Week 30 minutes concerns. And as such, alternatives like Ekitiké or Calvert-Lewin become more interesting. And then on to O'Reilly. No real updates here, and again we're unlikely to get a proper update from Pep. In his case, it was a medial ankle roll, which is the worst kind of ankle roll. He could be fine, but I would be very cautious, and with the same possible blank and fixture congestion, I'd probably be selling O'Reilly if I owned him, and moving him to Virgil if funds allow. And then on to Wilson. He played on against Spurs in Game Week 28, despite discomfort at half-time. This definitely offers some hope that he plays in Game Week 29, as it's unlikely that he'd be put back on the pitch if it was a major concern, or if they were already seeing significant swelling. And in my eyes, he's also 100% a keep. If he misses out in Game Week 29, he'll definitely be back for Game Week 30, and is a must-have for blank Game Week 31 for Burnley at home. And then Andersen, his teammate, he was out with an illness in Game Week 28. He's also 100% a keep, and will likely be back for Game Week 30, and should either play in Game Week 29 or be out of the squad entirely, so no one-pointer off the bench. It's an easy start for him. He's also the best defender for blank Game Week 31, again against Burnley at home. And then on to Rice, and this one's really tough to call. He requested to be subbed, which is very unlike him, usually playing as many minutes as possible, especially in big games, so this really wasn't a good sign. Arteta's been better recently with player updates, but unless we get a definitive he's fine, he's still likely a major doubt. And given that he has a guaranteed blank in Game Week 31, not a conditional one like the Man City players do, I would be looking to sell him this week, unless we get a very clear he's fine from Arteta in the presser, and moving him to Dango, Schade, Tavernier or Wilson, assuming we get word that Wilson is ready to play in Game Week 29, are all viable transfers. And then on to Evanilson. He could be out for Game Week 29, but it's not confirmed, and he's likely back for Game Week 30, so he's an optional sell. If you can't get to 11 players with him in your squad this week, assuming that he misses out, I'd be looking to sell him to Calvert-Lewin straight away. Or even better, if you have the funds to get to Ekitiké, I'd make that move for sure. However, if he is likely to be back for Game Week 29, he's probably a hold, although with so many other options in the Brentford front line, his minutes are somewhat of a doubt regardless of his fitness. And then Mukiele. He's out for 1 to 3 weeks and currently estimated to be back for Game Week 30. If he faces any delays in his recovery, then at worst, he could potentially even miss blank Game Week 31. And if you can't get to 11 starters this week with him in your squad, or you have some spare transfers to use, I would be selling him to move to Hill. And if you can get to 11 starters with Mukiele on the bench, I'll probably hold him and reevaluate in blank Game Week 31. And then finally Wirtz. He's going to be out for Game Week 29 and expected back for Game Week 30. Similar to Mukiele, if you can get to 11 starters without him, I'd be holding him for this week. And if you can't, I'd maybe be selling him, especially if you really need the money elsewhere. But given that there aren't a lot of like-for-like players in that £8 million price range who are solid buys right now either, I wouldn't be rushing to sell Wirtz, and in my case, I won't be doing. So how does this all affect my team? Well, with 3 flags in total, I'll be keeping a close eye on updates from Pep about Haaland's fitness, as he's the player of the 3 who has the most going against him, with the potential injury, the potential minutes risk in Game Week 30, and the likely blank in Game Week 31. And I'm happy holding Wirtz through till Game Week 30, where he'll likely be back and ready for 2 great games against Spurs and Brighton before our wildcard in Game Week 32. And with Wilson in the same boat, although I think there's already a decent chance that he'll be back in Game Week 29 anyway. So as far as Haaland, my planned transfer for this week, unless we get a clear indication that Haaland will be back and fully fit for Game Week 29, is Haaland to Ekitiké. And with no blank in Game Week 31, solid minutes and exceptional XGI, Ekitiké is arguably the standout better option than Haaland from Game Week 29 to 31, even if Haaland wasn't a potential injury risk. I've got Chalobah to cover a potential sideline for Wilson, so no need to take any hits elsewhere. And then taking a quick peek forwards. In Game Week 30, we'll expect Wirtz to be back, so he rejoins the team in place of Wilson, so I can just roll the transfer. And then in blank Game Week 31, after moving my 3 blanking players, plus the non-playing Guy to the bench, I just need a single move of Timber to Andersen to complete my coverage for the blank game week, and with a transfer to spare in case of any other unexpected injury updates. So now, hopping back to Game Week 29 for captaincy decisions, looking at predicted points from FPL Review and Fantasy Football Hub. The captaincy this week is a really close call between Ekitiké and Bruno, and they're the only 2 options for me. Provisionally, my captaincy is going to be on Ekitiké. Last week was no fluke. He's been putting up some of the most formidable XG numbers of any player this season, has next to no minutes contest with Isak still a long way away from returning to the squad, and has a great fixture this week against Wolves, who have looked better in recent weeks but are still far from a solid team overall. Bruno therefore gets the vice captaincy, but there's still a lot going for him as well. He showed last week just how potent a player with penalties and a high general goal involvement can be, and while Newcastle away is traditionally a tough fixture, Newcastle are sorely missing their main man, Bruno Guimaraes, having lost 5 of the last 6 Premier League games, Plus, as a team that won't be content with just sitting idle all game, this is the kind of game where United attack can actually thrive again, following a couple of slower paced games recently against lower blocking opponents. And of course, it's worth mentioning, if Haaland does end up staying in my team instead of Ekitiké due to a high confidence of starting, he will get the captain's armband in Game Week 29, but that is a big if. And that'll wrap up my Gameweek29 team selection. Drop a comment with any final questions that you need answering for your team in Gameweek 29, and I'll respond with my thoughts before the deadline. If you enjoyed the video, dropping a like does wonders for helping the algorithm show this video to other FPL managers. And if you want to see more from me, get subscribed to the channel. I only put out 1 or 2 videos max per week, summarising all of my thoughts, research and analysis into a quick, easily digestible video. I'm aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season, and I really appreciate all of the support until then. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in Game Week 30. Best of luck, and fingers crossed for another green arrow.